The snow was falling over Maple Hollow that night, quiet, endless, hiding every secret beneath its white silence. A wounded officer sat in his truck, staring into the storm, his loyal German shepherd resting beside him. He had lost everything, his badge, his purpose, his hope, until a little girl appeared, holding a baby and a promise that would change his life forever. Save my brother, and I'll make you walk again. What happened next became the miracle this small town would never forget. Before we begin this story of courage, redemption, and the bond between a man and his dog, tell me, where are you watching from today? Drop your country in the comments below. I'd love to know how far this story travels. And if you believe that miracles still happen, hit subscribe, join our community, and may your day be filled with light, kindness, and the quiet strength of faith. The wind that night carried the scent of pine and frost through the narrow streets of Maple Hollow, a small mountain town in northern Colorado, where winter often overstayed its welcome. Snow fell in lazy spirals, dusting the rooftops and coating the frozen river that split the town in two. Street lamps glowed dimly through the flurries, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled 7 times. Inside Grady's diner, the only place still open past dark, warmth flickered against the windows, fogging the glass in soft circles. At a corner booth sat Ethan Cole, a man of 38 whose life had been carved by service and loss. Once a decorated police officer with the Denver K-9 unit, Ethan had been confined to a wheelchair for nearly 2 years after an explosion during a hostage rescue left his spine fractured. His once broad frame had grown leaner, but there was still a hardness in his shoulders, a soldier's posture that no injury could erase. His brown hair, cut short, had begun to gray at the temples. His blue eyes, steady and tired, reflected a man who had seen too much and felt too little since. He wore a dark wool coat and leather gloves, even indoors, a habit left from months of hospital sterility that never really left him. Beneath the table, resting his massive head on Ethan's boot, was Ranger, a 7-year-old German shepherd, once Ethan's K-9 partner and now his guardian shadow. Ranger's fur was a blend of black and tan, thick around the neck like a lion's mane, and his right ear bore a scar from the night of the explosion. The dog's eyes were sharp, amber, and alert, but there was gentleness in the way he looked up at Ethan, as if guarding not just his body, but his broken spirit. The two were inseparable now, and in a town that whispered pity behind closed doors, they understood each other in silence. Ethan lifted a mug of black coffee, the steam warming his face, and watched the snow fall outside. The diner was half empty. The waitress, Marlene, a woman in her late 40s with curly auburn hair and a smile worn thin from years of night shifts, was refilling a pot of coffee. Marlene had a raspy laugh and eyes that carried both kindness and fatigue. Her husband had died in a mining accident a decade earlier, and since then, she treated every lonely man in town like one of her own sons. She waved the pot toward Ethan. "Another cup, hun?" He shook his head. "I'm good, thanks." "Suit yourself," she said, moving on, humming softly to the radio that played old Christmas songs from the 60s. Ethan turned his gaze back to the window. Snowflakes swirled beneath the streetlight, soft as falling ash. The sound of a bell over the door broke his focus. He didn't look up at first. Maple Hollow was small enough that everyone knew everyone, but when the murmur of voices fell to a hush, curiosity drew his eyes. A girl had entered the diner, barefoot except for torn socks that left her toes, red from the cold. She couldn't have been older than 11. Her hair was a tangle of chestnut waves, crusted with snow, and her thin coat clung damply to her small frame. In her arms she held a baby wrapped in a gray blanket, its face pale, breathing faintly. The child couldn't have been more than 6 months old. The girl's lips trembled, but her eyes, green and startlingly clear, were steady. Marlene gasped softly. "Sweetheart, are you lost? You can't be out there in that weather." The girl ignored her and looked straight at Ethan. There was a kind of defiant purpose in her walk as she crossed the linoleum floor, each step leaving a small pool of melted snow. Ranger stirred under the table, ears perked, eyes tracking her movement. When she stopped before Ethan's booth, every eye in the diner was on them. She spoke, her voice thin but unwavering. "You're Officer Cole, right? The one who can't walk?" The question struck him like a slap, not cruelly, but with the bluntness only a child could manage. Ethan straightened in his chair. "Who told you that?" "No one," she said. "I've seen you. You live on Birch Street. You used to have a badge." He blinked, unsure what to make of her. "That's right. What's your name?" "Lila," she said simply. "Lila Hart, and this is my brother, Luke." She shifted the bundle slightly to show the sleeping baby's face. "He's very sick. The doctor said he won't make it if I don't find help." Ethan frowned, softening. "You should be at the hospital, not here." Lila shook her head. "They turned us away, said we had no insurance. But I heard about you." Her voice dropped lower, trembling only once. "If you save my brother, I'll make you walk again." The diner fell silent. A man at the counter stifled a chuckle, and even Marlene froze mid-step, unsure whether she'd heard correctly. Ethan stared at the girl, unable to speak. Ranger tilted his head, sensing the strange shift in the air. "Sweetheart," Marlene said carefully, "you don't mean that." But Lila's gaze didn't waver. "I mean it. You save him, and I promise you'll walk again." Ethan's breath left him in a short laugh, sharp and humorless. "That's not how the world works, kid. I've had every doctor, every therapy, every—" "I know what I said," she interrupted. Her grip tightened around the baby. "And I don't lie." The conviction in her voice silenced him again. For a moment, he forgot where he was. The smell of coffee, the hum of the heater, the sound of spoons clinking faded until it was only her voice in his mind. He studied her closer. Her skin was pale under the fluorescent light, her cheeks hollow, hands trembling from the cold. Yet her eyes were fierce, eyes that had seen things children shouldn't see. There was intelligence there, and something deeper, a knowledge born from surviving much for too long. "Where are your parents?" Ethan finally asked. Lila looked down. "Gone." He wanted to ask more, but something in her expression told him not to. Ranger gave a low whine, pressing his head against Ethan's leg. The baby stirred, letting out a weak cough that sounded more like a gasp. Lila's eyes filled with panic. "Please, he can't breathe right sometimes. I tried to keep him warm, but the shelter's closed." Marlene was already moving toward the phone. "I'll call the hospital." "No!" Lila's shout stopped her cold. The sound was raw, desperate. "They'll just say no again. Please don't." Ethan exhaled, the weariness in him heavy as stone. He'd seen that same fear too many times before, in domestic calls, in the eyes of children waiting for rescue that came too late. He rubbed his temples, trying to think. "Why me, Lila? Why do you think I can help?" "Because you were a cop," she said softly. "And because I know what's happening to you. You think you're broken, but you're not. Someone's hurting you, poisoning you." Ethan froze. The words landed like a match striking oil. His jaw tightened. "What did you just say?" Lila didn't flinch. "I saw her. A woman. She bought small bottles from a man near the old pet store on Birch Avenue. The bottles had no labels, and she paid cash. That's the same kind of bottle the vet used once. The one that made the dog stop walking." The diner went silent again. The only sound was the heater humming and the faint ticking of the wall clock. Ethan stared at her, stunned. Madison? His ex-wife. The supplements she'd given him for years. His mind reeled, but he forced his voice steady. "You're saying you saw my wife?" Lila nodded. "I remember her hair. It was gold, tied up. She had a ring with a red stone." That detail made Ethan's stomach twist. Madison's garnet ring. A family heirloom she never took off. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "How do you know all this?" Lila shrugged, but her eyes dimmed. "You learn to notice things when you live on the street. You learn what hurts people." Ethan's throat tightened. He didn't know whether to believe her, but something about the way she said it, the calm, factual tone, made denial impossible. Before he could respond, the baby whimpered weakly. Lila's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "Please, he needs a doctor. I don't care what happens to me. Just help him." Ethan looked at Ranger. The dog's ears flicked forward, a quiet growl rising in his chest. Not threat, but urgency. A soldier's readiness. Ethan sighed deeply, then reached for his phone. "Marlene," he said, Warm up the truck. We're going to St. Helena Medical. Marlene blinked. You sure? Roads are bad. He nodded. Yeah, she's telling the truth, I can feel it. As Marlene hurried to get her coat, Ethan looked at the girl again. You stay close. Ranger will ride with you. For the first time, Lila's expression softened. She glanced down at the dog, who had moved beside her, sniffing the baby gently. He's kind, she whispered. He's the best cop I ever had, Ethan replied. Outside, the snow had thickened to a silent storm. Ethan maneuvered his wheelchair toward the door, the cold air cutting against his face. Ranger trotted ahead, tail high, clearing a path in the white. Behind them, Lila followed with the baby pressed to her chest, her small footprints filling fast with snow. And as the wind howled through the quiet town, Ethan Cole, broken, doubting, but moved, felt for the first time in years that something larger than logic was pulling him forward. The night that began with disbelief was turning into the first step of a miracle. Snow had turned to sleet by the time Ethan Cole pushed open the diner's door and rolled out into the night, the cold air biting against his skin. The wind howled down the narrow streets of Maple Hollow, turning every streetlight into a hazy halo. Ranger trotted beside his wheelchair, his thick fur matted with snow, his breath puffing in rhythmic bursts. Lila followed close behind, her small figure wrapped around the fragile weight of her baby brother. The child barely made a sound, but Ethan could hear the faint wheeze of his breathing through the storm. The town was quiet, too quiet. Maple Hollow at night always felt like a painting left unfinished, frozen between beauty and sorrow. Ethan maneuvered the wheelchair toward his truck, an old navy blue Ford that had been modified with hand controls. He had bought it the year before, mostly to prove he could still move through the world on his own. As the engine roared to life, Lila climbed into the passenger seat, clutching Luke tightly. Ranger jumped into the back seat, shaking off the snow and sitting upright like a sentinel. Buckle up, Ethan said, adjusting his gloves. Lila obeyed silently. Her face, framed by tangled brown hair, was still pale under the dim dashboard light. Ethan glanced at her once, noting the strange mixture of exhaustion and determination in her eyes. For someone so young, she carried herself like someone who had long stopped believing in miracles. Until tonight. They drove towards St. Helena Medical Center, a small hospital on the edge of town. The roads were slick, the tires crunching through half-frozen slush. For a while, neither of them spoke. The rhythmic wipers beat like a metronome to the sound of their thoughts. Finally, Lila broke the silence. You don't believe me, do you? Ethan kept his eyes on the road. I'm not sure what to believe right now. I know what I saw, she said softly, rocking the baby in her arms. The man she bought it from. He lives near the train tracks. People call him Doc Heller, but he's no doctor. That name stirred something faint in Ethan's memory. Heller, he repeated. Lila nodded. He sells bottles to people who want to hurt animals or people they don't like. I've seen dogs fall down after he gives their owners those bottles. Ethan's grip tightened on the steering wheel. He remembered that name from a past case. Clarence Heller, a disgraced veterinarian stripped of his license for illegal euthanasia drugs. He had vanished years ago after fleeing Denver. The thought that his ex-wife could have found him made his stomach knot. They reached the hospital just after 9. A nurse rushed forward as Ethan parked under the emergency lights. Her name badge read Claire Morrison. She was in her early 30s, tall and slender, with dark hair pinned into a bun and a face that showed both compassion and weariness, the kind that came from years of working double shifts. Claire had grown up in Maple Hollow. She was the kind of woman who remembered everyone's names, even the ones who wanted to forget themselves. When she saw Lila step out of the truck, she frowned. Oh dear, that baby's freezing. Come inside, sweetheart. Lila hesitated. We can't pay. Claire gave her a tired smile. Let me worry about that. She gestured toward Ethan. You brought her here? He nodded. She showed up at Grady's, said her brother needed help. Claire's eyes softened. Then you did the right thing. Inside the ER, the light was harsh, the air thick with antiseptic. Lila sat in a corner while the medical team examined Luke. Ranger lay at her feet, his massive body pressed protectively against her legs. Ethan waited nearby, watching through the glass as the doctors worked. After a while, Claire approached him. "The baby's stable for now," she said. "Severe bronchial infection, maybe pneumonia. We'll need to run tests." "Do whatever it takes," Ethan said, reaching for his wallet. "Put it on my account." Claire hesitated. "Ethan, your insurance doesn't cover—" "I said do it," he interrupted, his tone firm. She nodded, understanding the kind of man who meant what he said. As she walked away, Ethan turned to look at Lila. The girl was hunched forward, her hands clasped tightly, eyes fixed on the door where her brother had been taken. He rolled toward her, the wheels of his chair humming softly on the tile floor. "You did good bringing him here," he said. She shook her head. "I didn't bring him. You did." He almost smiled. "You sound older than 11. She looked up at him, her expression solemn. "When you don't have anyone else, you learn fast." There was no self-pity in her tone, just truth. Ethan saw something of himself in that. How pain carves out maturity where innocence should live. Just then, a deep voice called his name. "Cole! Ethan Cole!" Ethan turned to see Sergeant Harold Dunn entering the corridor, his heavy boots echoing. Harold was a broad man in his 50s, his hair steel gray and cut military short. His face bore the rugged lines of a man who'd seen too many winters and too many cases gone wrong. He had been Ethan's partner years ago, the kind who grumbled instead of comforted, but whose loyalty was absolute. "Harold," Ethan said, surprised. "What are you doing here? Heard your name over dispatch. Nurse said you came in with a couple kids." Harold's gaze shifted to Lila and softened. "This her?" Ethan nodded. "Lila Hart." Harold crouched down beside her, the leather of his jacket creaking. "You're brave, kid. Not many would walk through a snowstorm to save someone." Lila didn't answer. She just looked at him warily, clutching the blanket around her. "Don't mind him," Ethan said. "He sounds like a bear, but he's just loud." Harold grunted. Yeah. Look, Ethan, we need to talk. Outside." Ethan followed him to the waiting area, where the smell of cheap coffee and disinfectant mixed unpleasantly. Harold lowered his voice. "You mentioned something about your ex-wife being involved in some bad stuff. You serious about that?" Ethan hesitated. "The girl says Madison bought something from a man named Heller. You remember him?" Harold's brow furrowed. "The vet from Denver? Yeah, I thought he disappeared." "Apparently not." Harold rubbed his chin. "Listen, I'll dig around, but if she's mixed up with Heller, that's dangerous territory. He's tied to some people you don't want to cross." "Do what you can," Ethan said. "And Harold, keep it quiet?" The sergeant nodded. "Always." When Ethan rolled back to Lila's side, she was dozing off in the chair, Ranger's head resting gently across her feet. For a moment, the sight stilled him. The girl's face, softened by sleep, looked peaceful for the first time. The child she had carried through the storm was safe, for now. Claire returned with a clipboard. "The baby will need to stay overnight. We'll move them to a room soon." Ethan nodded. "I'll cover the cost." Claire placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice lowering. "Ethan, you've done enough. Go home. Rest. We'll take care of them." But he shook his head. "No, I'll wait." And he did. Hours passed. The snow outside stopped, leaving the world wrapped in white silence. Ranger stayed awake beside Lila, occasionally lifting his head to glance toward the door. The soft hum of machines filled the hallway. Sometime before dawn, Harold returned with 2 cups of coffee. He looked tired, but there was something else in his eyes. Concern. "I ran that name, Heller," he said quietly. "You were right. He's back in business under a fake clinic name in the North District. And Madison, your wife, her bank account's been receiving transfers from one of his shell companies for months." Ethan's jaw tightened. "So it's true." "Looks that way," Harold said grimly. "You want me to pull a warrant?" Ethan thought of Lila, asleep on the chair, of the baby hooked to machines, of the impossible promise she had made him hours ago. "No," he said finally. "Not yet. I want to see it with my own eyes first." Harold nodded slowly. "Then we'll do it your way." As the first light of dawn crept through the hospital windows, Ethan looked toward the pediatric room where Luke slept and whispered to himself, "You keep your promise, kid, and I'll keep mine." Outside, the storm had passed. The streets of Maple Hollow glistened under a thin pink sunrise. Ranger pressed his muzzle against Ethan's knee, and the officer rested a hand on his head. Somewhere in the quiet, the echo of the girl's words returned to him, "Save my brother, and I'll make you walk again." And for the first time, he dared to believe it might not be madness. It might be destiny. Morning came slowly to Maple Hollow, the sun barely rising above the mountain ridge. A thin mist curled along the streets, softening the scars left by the night storm. The hospital parking lot glittered with ice, and Ethan Cole sat in his truck, his hands wrapped around a cup of lukewarm coffee. His wheelchair rested beside him, folded neatly, Ranger's large head resting on his lap. The German shepherd's golden eyes flickered between the hospital door and his master's face, as if reading the tension in Ethan's silence. Inside, Lila and Luke had been moved to a small recovery room. Ethan hadn't slept. His thoughts ran in circles around one name, Heller. The girl's words wouldn't leave him. Madison. The bottles. The slow poison. When the hospital doors opened, Nurse Claire Morrison stepped outside. The early light caught on the silver badge clipped to her chest. She looked composed, though the purple shadows under her eyes betrayed another long night. She had changed out of her scrubs into a heavy wool coat, her dark hair tied back in a loose braid. "He's stable," she said, leaning against the truck door. "The antibiotics are working. You saved that baby, Ethan." He shook his head. "The girl did. She walked through a storm to get here." Claire smiled faintly. "Maybe so, but it takes more than courage to be heard in this town. Most people walk past stories like hers and pretend they don't see them." Ethan didn't answer. His gaze drifted toward the hospital's upper floor, where Lila sat behind the window, holding Luke in her arms. The glass glowed faintly, framing her like a figure in an old painting, fragile yet unyielding. He felt something stir, an old instinct buried under years of numbness. It wasn't pity. It was duty. Claire followed his gaze. "She's a strong one," she murmured. "When I asked about her parents, she said they're gone where good people don't go." Didn't elaborate. Ethan frowned. "She's hiding something." "Or protecting someone," Claire replied softly. "Sometimes it's the same thing." She tucked her hands in her coat pockets. "You heading somewhere?" He nodded. "North District. I need to find Heller." Claire's brows knit. "Ethan, if this man's what I think he is, you can't just roll in there alone." "I'm not alone," he said, patting Ranger's neck. The dog raised his head, alert, as if understanding the weight of his name. Claire sighed. "Then at least promise you'll be careful." He gave her a tired grin. "When have I ever been careful?" She smiled back, but her eyes betrayed worry. "Exactly my point." Ethan drove toward the north end of town, where the old rail yard stood abandoned, a stretch of cracked asphalt lined with rusted containers and warehouses. Ranger sat upright in the passenger seat, ears twitching, tail thumping once every few seconds. A silent metronome of readiness. The area smelled of damp metal and rot. A faded sign read, "Heller's Feed and Care, Estion 1983. The building behind it was 2 stories tall, half collapsed on one side, windows boarded up. Ethan parked near the edge of the lot. "Stay close," he murmured. Ranger whined in agreement. They approached the door, which hung crooked on its hinges. Inside, the air was stale and sharp with chemical residue. Old cages lined the walls, some empty, others holding the remains of what looked like small animals. Ethan's jaw tightened. This was no clinic. From the back of the room came a faint sound, metal scraping concrete. Ethan motioned to Ranger, who crouched low, muscles tense. The noise grew louder until a figure appeared through the half-lit doorway. Clarence Heller was a man in his 60s, tall but stooped, his thin white hair plastered against his scalp. His eyes, pale blue and rimmed with yellow, had the feverish gleam of someone who'd spent too long alone with dangerous ideas. He wore a stained lab coat over a threadbare sweater, and his hands were inked with old scars, chemical burns by the look of them. "Well, if it isn't Officer Cole," Heller rasped, his voice rough like sandpaper. "Didn't expect to see you on 2 wheels again." Ethan's expression didn't change. "I'm here about Madison." The old man smirked. Pretty thing that one. Always paid in cash, never asked too many questions." Ethan's pulse quickened. "What did you sell her?" Supplements, Heller said lightly, feigning innocence. Natural blends for vitality, mood, longevity. Don't lie to me. Ethan's voice dropped lower. She's been giving me your poison for years. Heller chuckled, revealing teeth stained by age and nicotine. Poison's a strong word, officer. Let's just say, dosage is everything. She asked for something that weakens without killing, something that would make you dependent. He stepped closer, his breath foul with tobacco. You ever wonder why your hands shake more after she leaves the room? Ranger growled, low and deep. Ethan felt his stomach twist. The truth landed like a knife. Madison hadn't just wanted control. She'd wanted ownership. Heller circled him slowly. Don't look so surprised. Love makes monsters of us all. She said she couldn't stand the idea of you leaving. Said you were her last bit of pride. Ethan's voice was calm, but his grip on the chair tightened until his knuckles turned white. You're going to write down everything, every delivery, every payment. Then you're going to hand over whatever's left of the formula. Heller sneered. Or what? You'll sick your dog on me? At that, Ranger bared his teeth. The old man froze as the shepherd advanced, every step deliberate. You'd be surprised what he can still do, Ethan said. For a moment, the air hung still. Then, Heller's bravado cracked. He shuffled to a desk littered with bottles and papers, scribbling frantically. Ethan scanned the labels, unmarked capsules, amber vials, handwritten notes filled with chemical abbreviations. A loud bang cut through the silence, the slam of a car door outside. Ethan's instincts flared. Ranger! The dog darted toward the window. Through the broken pane, Ethan saw a black SUV pulling up, 2 men stepping out. They wore dark coats, faces hidden under caps. Who are they? Ethan demanded. Heller's eyes darted nervously. Clients, he said, voice trembling. I told you she wasn't the only one. Ethan reached for his phone, but before he could dial Harold, a gunshot shattered the glass. Ranger lunged instantly, barking furiously. The men outside shouted, their boots crunching on gravel. Ethan wheeled himself behind an overturned table. Stay down, he barked. Ranger bounded toward the door, slamming his weight against it until it burst open. Chaos followed, a flurry of barking, footsteps, and shouting. Ethan heard another gunshot, then a scream. When silence returned, Ranger stood in the doorway, panting, one ear bleeding, but the attackers were gone, fled into the maze of warehouses. Ethan rolled forward. Heller was crouched behind the desk, clutching his arm. You brought them here, he hissed. You're the one dealing poison, Ethan snapped. Who are they? Heller's breath came fast. You don't understand. This goes higher. There's a man funding everything, testing the compounds for control, not cure. You dig too deep, you'll end up dead like the others. Ethan grabbed the papers from his desk. Then I'll take that chance. Ranger nudged his leg, urging him toward the exit. Behind them, Heller shouted, You think you can save yourself, officer? Some cages don't open from the outside. Ethan didn't look back. They burst into the freezing air just as Harold's police truck screeched to a halt at the end of the alley. Harold jumped out, shotgun in hand, his gray hair disheveled. Jesus, Ethan, what the hell did you walk into? Proof, Ethan said, holding up the papers. And a bigger mess than we thought. Harold glanced at Ranger, bleeding but alert. That dog's worth 10 of us. Yeah, Ethan said quietly, stroking the dog's neck. And he never lies. As they drove away, the morning fog thickened, swallowing the alley whole. The file on Ethan's lap felt heavier than any weapon. Somewhere inside, he knew this was only the beginning. The poison wasn't just in his veins. It was in the town, the system, and the people he had once trusted. And somewhere back at St. Helena, a little girl was waiting, believing in promises he hadn't yet learned how to keep. The storm clouds that had loomed over Maple Hollow finally broke apart by evening, letting streaks of pale light fall through the pine-covered hills. The world felt fragile and clean after the chaos of that morning. The warehouse still smoldered in Ethan Cole's mind, and the smell of chemical rot clung to his coat. The drive back to town was silent. Harold Dunn kept his eyes on the road, his knuckles white against the steering wheel, while Ranger lay in the back seat with a bandage around his ear, head resting on Ethan's shoulder. The steady rise and fall of the dog's breath kept Ethan anchored. You should have let me call for backup, Harold muttered finally. 2 men with guns and a mad scientist. That's not a solo mission. Ethan's gaze stayed on the window. I didn't have time to wait, and you wouldn't have believed me if I told you what I was going after. Harold grunted, half amused, half frustrated. You still think like a cop, Cole, but you're not one anymore. Ethan's jaw tightened. I'm still a man who can smell rot in a system. They reached Ethan's small cabin on Birch Street as twilight settled. The place looked nothing like the life he used to have. A 1-story home tucked behind evergreens, the porch covered in snow. Inside, the living room was simple. A worn leather couch, an old bookshelf, a stack of case files he could never bring himself to throw away. A single-frame photo hung over the fireplace. Ethan in uniform, hand resting proudly on Ranger's back, both younger and unbroken. Harold set down a box of evidence from Heller's lab, vials, notes, an old external drive coated in dust. We'll need to send this to forensics, he said. Ethan shook his head. Not yet. I want to know what's on it first. Harold gave him a long look. You're playing a dangerous game, partner. The game's already started, Ethan replied. As they spoke, Ranger got up, limping slightly, and moved toward the door. He barked once, short and sharp. Ethan followed his gaze through the window. Someone was coming up the path. A figure in a dark parka, small and familiar. Lila. She was carrying a paper bag, and her brother, now awake and bundled in a thicker blanket. Behind her, Nurse Claire Morrison followed, her face red from the cold. She refused to stay at the hospital, Claire said when Ethan opened the door. Said she didn't want to owe anyone. Ethan frowned. You walked all this way? Didn't trust taxis, Lila said simply. People ask too many questions. There was that quiet defiance again, mature beyond her years. Ethan moved his chair aside so she could come in. Lila glanced around the cabin, her eyes pausing on the police photograph, then on Ranger. You live here alone? Yeah, Ethan said. Just me and him. It's quiet, she murmured. Too quiet. Claire smiled faintly. That's because some people prefer ghost to company. Ethan gave her a mock glare. You saying I'm haunted? I'm saying you act like it, she replied, peeling off her gloves. Lila placed the paper bag on the table. I brought food, she said. Inside were 2 sandwiches wrapped in napkins and a bottle of milk for Luke. Ethan felt a pang. He had seen hardened detectives show less grace under pressure than this child. Harold took the evidence box to the kitchen table, pulling out the old drive. If this thing even turns on, it might tell us who's paying Heller. He connected it to Ethan's laptop, the screen flickering with static before a series of folders appeared, trials, clients, and notes. Ethan clicked open Clients. Rows of initials and transaction codes filled the screen. Harold leaned over. Half these payments are routed through shell accounts in Denver. The last one, MH. Ethan froze. Madison Hale. Claire's voice cut in softly. Your ex-wife. Ethan nodded slowly. She didn't just buy poison. She helped fund it. Before anyone could speak, Lila whispered, That's not all. They turned toward her. I heard Heller say a name before he sold her the bottles. A man named Doyle. He said, Tell Captain Doyle the next shipment's ready. Harold went pale. Captain Doyle's still with Internal Affairs, he said, lowering his voice. He oversaw your case after the explosion. Ethan remembered the cold look in Doyle's eyes the day he was forced to retire. The man was tall, always dressed in dark suits, hair slicked back like a politician, his charm as polished as his lies. He made the call that ended my career, Ethan said, and now he's tied to this. Ranger growled low, pacing near the window. Outside, the snow reflected the faint beam of headlights moving slowly down the street. Ethan's instincts kicked in. Harold, lights off. The cabin fell into shadow. The vehicle stopped near the fence. A man stepped out, tall, wearing a long black coat. Even from a distance, Ethan recognized that sharp posture. Doyle. He's here, Ethan whispered. Claire grabbed Lila's shoulder and moved her behind the couch. Harold pulled his revolver from his coat. Ethan wheeled toward the back door. We need to move now. There's a path through the woods that leads to the service road. Too late, Harold said, peering through the window. He's got 2 men with him. Ranger barked once, loud and defiant. The figures outside froze. Then Doyle's voice carried through the wind, smooth, commanding. "Ethan, I just want to talk." "Yeah?" Ethan called back. "You send bullets to start conversations now? Let's not play games. You have something that belongs to me. Step outside and we can end this quietly." Ethan's pulse hammered. He signaled to Harold. "Back exit. Take the girl." Harold nodded, guiding Lila toward the kitchen. Claire held the baby tight, whispering soft prayers under her breath. Ethan stayed by the front, gripping his gun. Ranger crouched beside him, eyes fixed on the door. "You ready, partner?" Ethan murmured. Ranger's tail thumped once. The door handle turned slowly. Before it could open, Ethan fired a warning shot into the snow. "That's close enough!" For a moment, there was silence. Then Doyle's calm voice again. "You really want another accident on your conscience?" The words hit like ice. Ranger barked, and the next second, the sound of shattering glass erupted behind them. A window breaking, someone trying to flank the cabin. Ranger lunged before Ethan could shout. The dog slammed into the intruder, knocking him down. The man dropped his weapon, shouting as Ranger pinned him, teeth bared inches from his throat. Harold returned, firing a shot through the doorway, forcing Doyle's men to scatter. "Back car's ready!" he yelled. Ethan wheeled toward the back exit. "Ranger, come!" The shepherd obeyed instantly, blood streaking his fur but eyes bright with adrenaline. They escaped into the woods, the snow deep but the path clear under moonlight. Lila stumbled, but Harold lifted her up, his strength steady despite age. Claire followed close behind, clutching Luke. Behind them, headlights swung wildly, then faded. When they reached the service road, Ethan's truck waited. He'd left it hidden behind an old cabin long ago. They climbed in, breathless. Harold looked at Ethan. "You all right?" "I've been worse," Ethan said. He looked at Lila, her cheeks flushed from cold. "You okay?" She nodded. "They won't stop, will they?" Ethan shook his head. "Not until we make them." Ranger settled in beside her, resting his head on her lap. She stroked his fur gently, whispering something Ethan couldn't hear. The dog closed his eyes, the tension easing for the first time. As they drove through the forest road, the moonlight filtered through the branches, silver and cold. Ethan's mind raced, not just with fear, but resolve. He had spent 2 years trapped by pain and doubt, but now the pieces were falling into place. The poison wasn't an accident. It was a weapon, and Madison hadn't been working alone. Somewhere in the distance, sirens echoed faintly through the trees. Ethan didn't know if they belonged to allies or enemies. All he knew was that he had the evidence, the girl, and the truth. And for the first time in years, he wasn't running from the dark. He was running into it. He pressed the gas harder, the old truck rumbling through the snow. Ranger lifted his head and barked once toward the horizon. "Yeah, boy," Ethan said quietly. "We're not done yet." Dawn crept across the mountains like a hesitant apology. The sky above Maple Hollow blushed faint pink before bleeding into silver, while the road stretching east shimmered with frost. Ethan Cole's truck hummed low through the winding forest road, its tires crunching the icy gravel. Inside, the air was thick with silence. Harold drove, his face set in grim focus. Claire sat in the back, rocking the baby gently, her eyes distant and alert all at once. Lila sat beside Ranger, who rested his head on her lap. The German shepherd's bandaged ear twitched occasionally, and each time Lila's hand brushed it, he sighed as if in quiet gratitude. Ethan hadn't spoken since they left the cabin. His mind was a storm of thoughts: Madison's betrayal, Doyle's corruption, the shadows of his old life clawing back through the snow. He stared out the window, jaw clenched, while the mountains rolled past like silent witnesses. Finally, Harold broke the silence. "You can't keep running, Cole. You've got evidence. Hand it over and let the Bureau handle it." Ethan shook his head. "The Bureau's not clean either. Doyle's got roots deep in both directions. If I hand this over, it'll vanish like everything else did." Harold sighed. "You're right about one thing. He's always been a snake." He took his eyes off the road for a moment. "You remember the night of the explosion?" Ethan stiffened. "Every second of it." "I've been thinking," Harold said. "The report never added up. They said the gas leak was accidental, but the valve had manual scoring marks. Someone wanted that place to blow. Maybe Doyle wanted you gone long before your injury. Ethan turned to him slowly. You're saying the explosion wasn't an accident? I'm saying Doyle's been cleaning house for years. Anyone who stood in his way either got promoted out of town or buried under it. The realization hit Ethan like ice water. He'd spent 2 years believing his paralysis was fate, one unlucky step at the wrong time. But now the truth clawed up through the cracks. It wasn't fate. It was design. Behind them, Lila's voice broke through the heavy air. Why would anyone do that to someone trying to help people? Ethan turned to meet her gaze. She looked smaller in the morning light, her green eyes bright but tired. Because some people don't want help, he said. They want control. Claire cleared her throat softly. We need to stop soon. The baby needs feeding, and we could all use a break. There's a rest lodge ahead, Harold said, pointing. Old ranger station. Nobody's used it in years. They pulled off the main road and into a clearing surrounded by towering pines. The station was a squat wooden structure with faded green paint, half buried under snowdrifts. Harold forced the door open with a grunt. Inside, it smelled of pine resin and dust. A wood stove sat cold, in the corner beside a stack of firewood. Claire set down the baby, while Lila knelt beside Ranger, rubbing warmth into his fur. Ethan rolled closer to the stove. We'll rest an hour, then move again. Harold started the fire, the crackling flames spreading amber light through the room. Claire boiled water on a camp stove she found, while Lila sat cross-legged, feeding bits of bread to Ranger. You really trust him, don't you? She asked Ethan. He smiled faintly. More than I trust most people. He's saved my life more times than I can count. Lila nodded solemnly. He saved mine too. The warmth began to seep into the small room. For a fleeting moment, it almost felt like peace. But it didn't last. A knock sounded at the door, soft but deliberate. Harold froze, hand hovering near his holster. You expecting anyone? Ethan shook his head. Nobody knows we're here. The knock came again. Claire clutched the baby tighter. Lila's eyes widened, and Ranger rose, standing between her and the door, hackles bristling. Harold opened the door just a crack. A man stood outside, bundled in a dark coat, his breath misting in the cold. He looked to be in his early 40s, tall but lean, with dark hair and the kind of eyes that had seen too much. Name's Marcus Boyd, he said quietly. Used to work internal affairs. You must be Cole. Harold narrowed his eyes. You show up in the middle of nowhere, no badge, no backup, and expect us to believe that? Marcus raised his hands. You don't have to, but I have something you'll want to see. He held out a small flash drive. Files from Doyle's private network. I've been tracking him for 6 months. Ethan wheeled closer. How did you find me? Marcus's gaze flicked to Ranger. You leave a trail, officer. Not many men move through a snowstorm with a war dog and a child. His voice softened. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to finish what you started. Harold glanced at Ethan, then back at Marcus. Let him in. Inside, Marcus set the drive on the table. Doyle's not just running drugs or poison. He's building leverage on cops, on officials, on anyone who could expose him. Your wife? She was a pawn. She thought she was buying medicine, but Heller sold her modified compounds tied to Doyle's fund. He's been dosing you to keep you dependent and silent. Ethan stared at the drive. So he turned my life into evidence control. Marcus nodded. And now he's trying to erase it. Claire stepped forward, her voice trembling with anger. You're saying he used medical poisoning as a way to silence witnesses? Marcus met her eyes. Yes, you're not the first case, but you might be the last if we can prove it. Lila tugged on Ethan's sleeve. Then we show everyone. We tell the news, right? Ethan's heart twisted. It's not that easy, kid. People like Doyle control the story before it's told. Marcus inserted the flash drive into Ethan's laptop. The screen filled with encrypted documents, surveillance photos, and internal memos stamped confidential. Ethan scrolled through them slowly until one file caught his breath. Incident 41B, Maple Hollow Blast. He opened it. A scanned report appeared, signed by Captain Doyle. Beneath the signature was a note. Target neutralized, subject rendered permanently inactive. Ethan stared at it, his pulse pounding. His name was listed as subject. His chest tightened, breath catching like a man drowning. Harold swore under his breath. Son of a... He planned the explosion. Claire put a hand on Ethan's shoulder. He wanted you out of the way. Ethan's voice was barely a whisper. And he got what he wanted. Marcus's tone was firm. Not anymore. You have proof now. We leak this, and Doyle falls. Before Ethan could answer, Ranger barked sharply, ears pricking toward the window. Headlights flickered in the distance. 3 vehicles crawling up the forest road. Harold cursed. They tracked us again. Ethan's voice turned steady, almost cold. Then we move. Marcus, take Claire and the kids through the back trail. It'll lead to the logging road. What about you? Claire asked. I'll buy you time. Lila shook her head fiercely. No, you can't fight them. Ranger stood beside Ethan, teeth bared. Ethan's hand found the dog's neck, fingers gripping the familiar warmth. We've done it before. Marcus hesitated. He's right. We split up or we're all dead. He herded Claire and Lila toward the rear door, shoving his gun into his belt. The rumble of engines grew louder. Ethan wheeled himself to the front window, raising Harold's shotgun. Ranger crouched low, tail stiff. The first bullet shattered the glass, and the fire inside the stove flared from the gust of wind. Snow whirled through the open door like ash. Ethan fired once, the recoil jolting through his arms. Harold took position beside him, reloading between bursts. The echo of gunfire bounced across the trees. By the time headlights reached the clearing, Claire and the others had disappeared into the woods. Ethan smiled grimly. At least they're safe. Harold grinned back. You always had a lousy way of defining safe. They fought until the magazine clicked empty, until the headlights began to retreat. When the silence finally returned, Ethan leaned back in his chair, breath ragged. Ranger rested his head on his knee, eyes still alert. Harold exhaled, lowering his weapon. They'll be back, he said. I know, Ethan whispered, but next time, we'll be ready. Outside, the dawn light bled across the snow, washing the world in gold. Somewhere beyond the woods, the others were still running, but now they carried the proof that could bring it all down. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt not fear, but purpose. The forest swallowed the last echoes of gunfire as the sun climbed over the peaks of Maple Hollow, turning the frost-covered trees into shards of glass. Smoke drifted lazily above the ranger station, where Ethan Cole and Harold Dunn had made their stand. The air stung of cordite and pine sap. Ethan's arms trembled from the recoil, his palms blistered from gripping the shotgun too tightly. Ranger stood beside him, chest heaving, fur streaked with blood. Not his own this time. The dog's amber eyes glimmered with an instinct Ethan knew too well. Readiness. There was no victory here, only survival. Harold dropped the last shell casing into his coat pocket. They'll regroup soon, he muttered. We need to move before they circle back. Ethan glanced toward the road, where deep tire tracks vanished into the snow. They know where we are now. If Doyle's leading this, he won't stop. Harold grunted. Then let's stop him first. They packed quickly. Ammo, the drive Marcus had given them, a few rations. Ethan adjusted his chair straps while Harold loaded the truck. Ranger trotted ahead, nose low to the ground, scanning every scent as if the forest whispered secrets only he could hear. Before leaving, Ethan looked back once. The cabin still smoked, the snow around it trampled by chaos. For a man who'd once sworn to protect, it felt like watching his oath burn. He turned away. Let's find them. The road wound deeper into the hills, through frozen creeks and tall pines heavy with snow. The trail they followed wasn't visible to human eyes, but Ranger knew. His nose pressed close to the earth, tail rigid, paws sure, even on the slick terrain. After an hour, Harold spoke. You really think they made it to the logging road? Marcus knows how to move, Ethan said. And Claire? She's smarter than she lets on. Ranger suddenly halted, ears twitching. He whined, then barked once, low and sharp. Ethan motioned for Harold to stop. The dog began to circle a patch of ground ahead, sniffing furiously before pawing at the snow. Beneath it, half buried, was a strip of blue cloth, part of Claire's coat. Ethan exhaled in relief. They came through here. But the relief didn't last. Ranger's body stiffened again, his growl deep in warning. Ethan followed his gaze. At the edge of the clearing stood a figure, small, cloaked, trembling. It was Lila. She stumbled forward, cheeks pale, snow clinging to her hair. In her arms she clutched Luke, still wrapped in his blanket. When she saw Ethan, tears filled her eyes. "They took them!" she gasped. "Marcus and Claire, they took them away." Harold rushed forward. "Who?" "Men in black cars," she cried. "They caught us near the bridge. Marcus told me to run. He said to find you." Ethan's heart tightened. He glanced at Harold. "Doyle's men. They must have been waiting." Harold cursed under his breath. "If they're headed toward the old quarry, we might still catch them." Ethan turned to Lila, voice steady. "You did good, kid. You're safe now." She shook her head fiercely. "No one's safe until you stop him." There was fire in her voice, a defiance that mirrored his own years ago. Ethan looked at her, seeing not the frightened girl from the diner, but a survivor forged by loss. He set his jaw. "Then we end this." They drove through the winding back roads toward the quarry, an abandoned site that once mined granite before the town banned explosives. It was the perfect place for Doyle to hide. As they neared, snow began to fall again, thick and silent. The world turned ghostly white, muffling every sound except the hum of the engine and Ranger's steady breathing. Harold slowed the truck and cut the headlights. "We go in quiet." Ethan nodded, pulling on his gloves. Ranger jumped down first, paws sinking into the snow. The quarry loomed ahead, massive cliffs of gray stone rising over a frozen pit. In the distance, faint lights glowed near a warehouse built at the base. They crept forward. Ranger led the way, his nose twitching, tail low. As they reached the ridge, Ethan spotted movement below. 2 SUVs parked near the warehouse entrance. Men paced outside, rifles slung across their chests. Harold squinted. "Doyle's not subtle." "Arrogance never is," Ethan murmured. Through the cracked window of the warehouse, Ethan saw them, Claire and Marcus, bound to chairs. Doyle stood before them, tall, immaculate as always. His black coat hung perfectly, his silver hair slicked back. He looked more like a businessman than a criminal. In his gloved hand, he held a small syringe. Harold whispered, "What's he doing?" "Making sure no one talks," Ethan said grimly. Inside, Doyle's voice carried, cold, smooth, theatrical. "You see, Marcus, truth is a currency, and like all currencies, it loses value when you print too much of it." Marcus, bloodied but unbroken, spat at his feet. "You'll rot for this." Doyle smiled faintly. "Perhaps, but not before you." Ethan's blood boiled. He turned to Harold. "We need a distraction." Harold nodded. "I'll draw their fire. You get inside." "Harold, don't argue," he snapped. "I'm not the one with wheels slowing me down." Ethan clenched his jaw. "You're not expendable." "Neither are they," Harold said quietly, and then he slipped into the trees. Ethan looked down at Ranger. "You know what to do, boy." Ranger's ears pricked. He crouched low, waiting. A moment later, gunfire erupted from the opposite ridge, Harold's doing. The guards turned, shouting orders. Ranger sprang from the snow like a phantom, streaking toward the warehouse. Ethan followed, pushing his chair across the uneven ground, using every ounce of upper strength he had left. Inside, chaos broke loose. Ranger crashed through the side door, teeth flashing. One guard screamed as the dog barreled into him. Ethan entered seconds later, gun raised. Doyle turned, startled but still composed. "Cole," he said, almost amused, "you just don't know when to die." "Funny," Ethan replied. "I was thinking the same thing about you." Doyle aimed his pistol, but before he could fire, Ranger lunged, knocking the weapon from his hand. The syringe clattered to the floor, its contents spilling. Marcus used the moment to kick his chair backward, breaking the legs apart. Claire ducked behind a crate as bullets ricocheted. Ethan fired once, clean, sharp. The shot tore through Doyle's shoulder. The man staggered, expression twisting not in pain, but in disbelief. "You'll never prove anything," he hissed. Ethan rolled closer, eyes cold. "I don't have to. You already did." He nodded toward the camera above the door, its red light blinking. Doyle followed his gaze, realization dawning too late. The sirens came then, faint at first, then louder, echoing through the quarry. Harold's plan had worked. He'd called the feds before charging in. Doyle's men dropped their guns one by one. Ranger stood over his master's side, panting, fur dusted with snow and ash. Ethan's arms trembled, but he held his gun steady until the last echo faded. Marcus, bleeding but alive, stumbled forward. "You got him," he said. Ethan exhaled. "We got him." Outside, red and blue lights reflected off the cliffs, painting the snow in colors of justice. Doyle was led away in cuffs, his arrogance replaced by something far uglier: fear. When the agents cleared the scene, Claire walked to Ethan, placing a trembling hand on his shoulder. "You saved us." He shook his head. "No, she did." He nodded toward Lila, who stood at the entrance, clutching Luke, watching everything unfold with quiet strength. The child who had once begged for a miracle had become the reason one happened. Ethan looked down at Ranger. The shepherd's ears perked, his eyes bright despite exhaustion. Ethan reached to scratch his neck. "You did good, partner." Ranger wagged his tail once and pressed his head into Ethan's chest. For the first time in years, Ethan felt the weight in his heart begin to lift. Outside, the storm finally broke, revealing the stars. For a moment, the night was still, and in that stillness, Ethan knew their fight wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about redemption. The morning after the raid at the quarry was unnaturally quiet, the kind of silence that comes when violence has finally exhausted itself. Snow blanketed the ground in pure white, covering the tire marks and bloodstains as if the earth itself wanted to forget. Ethan Cole sat in the back of an ambulance parked near the police barricade, the sound of radios crackling faintly around him. He had refused medical treatment beyond a quick bandage on his shoulder. Ranger sat at his feet, wrapped in a thermal blanket, his fur matted and his gaze fixed on Ethan's face. Across the clearing, federal agents moved in and out of the warehouse, cataloging evidence. Captain Doyle's empire, his ledgers, the vials, the money trails, was being dismantled piece by piece. It was the end of something monstrous, but Ethan didn't feel triumph, only a hollow ache. Justice had a taste like cold metal. It didn't warm, it only burned. Lila stood beside Claire a few feet away, holding Luke close to her chest. Her eyes darted constantly, as if expecting danger to return. When Ethan caught her gaze, she gave a small nod. Gratitude and relief rolled into one. For a girl who had known too much fear, that gesture was enough to shatter his composure. Harold approached, his coat flapping in the wind. The man looked exhausted, gray stubble shadowing his chin, but his eyes still held that stubborn light. "They're taking Doyle downtown," he said. "Feds want your full statement once you've had rest." Ethan nodded absently. "He'll talk?" Harold shook his head. "Men like him never do, but we have enough. The recordings, the lab notes, Marcus's testimony. It's over." Marcus Boyd limped toward them, his arm in a sling, his face pale but determined. "Over for him, maybe," he said. "But there's cleanup ahead. Doyle's files name half a dozen partners across the state. This goes higher than we thought." Ethan rubbed a hand over his face. "It always does." He looked down at Ranger, who had laid his head across Ethan's boot. The dog's breathing was slow but steady, a soft rumble vibrating through his chest. "We need to get him checked," Ethan said. Claire knelt beside Ranger, running gentle fingers through his fur. "He's strong," she said, "but he's been through hell. Haven't we all?" Her words carried more weight than comfort. Claire Morrison was no stranger to loss. Her husband had died years before in the line of duty, leaving her alone with a newborn. She had joined the hospital corps to rebuild her life, but grief had sharpened her kindness into something fierce. It was that strength that had kept her calm through the night. Ethan turned to Lila. "You were brave last night," he said softly. "You saved them." Lila looked down at the snow. "I just did what Marcus told me to do. I ran." He smiled faintly. Sometimes running is what keeps others alive. The Buo agents began to clear the scene, leaving the quarry once again in stillness. As the convoy departed, Ethan's mind wandered to Madison, his ex-wife, sitting somewhere in a holding cell, her betrayal exposed. He didn't feel anger anymore, just a cold distance. She had been part of the chain that kept him trapped. Now the chain was gone, and all that remained was the question of what came next. By afternoon, they were back in Maple Hollow. The town felt both familiar and foreign, snow-covered porches, church bells echoing faintly through the valley. Yet everything seemed quieter, more fragile. They gathered at Harold's old cabin, a sturdy wooden home perched above the river. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and coffee. Claire settled the baby into a crib by the fire. Lila sat at the table, her hands folded around a mug too large for them. Ethan leaned against the wall, Ranger beside him, while Harold poured coffee into chipped mugs. "You look like a ghost," Harold said. "Feels like one," Ethan replied. Marcus sat at the table, spreading out papers, maps, files, photos of Doyle's associates. "You could walk away now," he said. "No one would blame you. You've done your part." Ethan shook his head. "If I stop now, they'll come back. They always do." Harold sighed. "You're not a cop anymore, Cole. You can't keep doing this alone." Ethan looked at Lila. "I'm not alone." That night, as the storm returned, Lila couldn't sleep. She lay awake on the couch, staring at the fire. Ranger slept near her feet, occasionally twitching in his dreams. She watched his chest rise and fall, the steady rhythm somehow reassuring. Ethan noticed her from the doorway. "Can't sleep?" She shook her head. "Every time I close my eyes, I see their faces, the men who took Marcus." He pulled a blanket tighter around his shoulders and sat across from her. "That's not weakness. That's memory reminding you what you survived." "Do you ever stop seeing things?" she asked. Ethan's gaze drifted toward the window, where snow whispered against the glass. "No," he said. "You just learn to live beside them." She thought about that for a moment. "You really think it's over?" Ethan hesitated. "It's never over. But maybe it's quiet enough for us to start again." The next morning brought something none of them expected: sunlight. It poured through the trees, turning the snow into 1,000 diamonds. For the first time in months, Maple Hollow looked alive. Ethan stepped outside, leaning on his cane. His leg braces were new, gifted by the medical team who'd examined him after the case. With therapy, they had said, he might walk unassisted someday. He watched Ranger chase a bird across the yard. His energy returned, his fur shining under the light. Lila stood on the porch, wrapped in a coat too big for her, laughing softly. The sound caught Ethan off guard. It was the first time he had heard her truly laugh. Marcus joined him, his arm still in a sling. "You're smiling," he said. Ethan looked at him. "Don't tell anyone." Marcus chuckled. "Wouldn't dream of it." They both watched as Lila ran through the snow with Ranger, her laughter echoing through the crisp air. For the first time since his injury, Ethan felt something shift inside him. Not just physical strength, but something deeper. Hope. Later, over breakfast, Harold read aloud from the local news. Feds confirm arrest of Captain Raymond Doyle in a corruption and poisoning scandal that spanned 3 states. Sources say a former officer provided key evidence. Ethan rolled his eyes. "They didn't even use my name." "Maybe that's for the best," Harold said. "Anonymous heroes sleep easier." Claire smiled softly. "Sometimes the world doesn't need to know who saved it, just that it was saved." Lila spoon-fed, Luke mashed oatmeal, the baby giggling between bites. "What happens to us now?" she asked suddenly. Ethan glanced at Harold, then back to her. "You stay here for a while. Maple Hollow's quiet, and you need time. After that," he hesitated. "After that, maybe we build something better." She frowned. "Like what?" He met her eyes. "Something that helps kids like you, like Luke. A place where no one gets left behind." Her lips parted in surprise. "You do that?" Ethan smiled. "I think it's time I start doing something that matters again." Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the faint sound of church bells down the valley. The sun gleamed on the frost, and for the first time, Ethan didn't feel trapped by it. He felt part of it, like the world had finally thawed. He looked down at Ranger, who had returned to his side, pressing against his knee with quiet loyalty. "We made it, boy," he whispered. "Somehow, we made it." The dog wagged his tail, and in that simple motion, the past began to loosen its grip. For Ethan Cole, the battle was no longer survival. It was rebuilding, one step, one breath, one act of kindness at a time. And as the morning light spilled across Maple Hollow, he realized something profound. Justice hadn't healed him. People had. Spring came early to Maple Hollow that year, as if nature herself wanted to start over. The snowmelt turned the rivers restless, and the scent of pine carried through the valley like a hymn of rebirth. Ethan Cole stood on the porch of the newly purchased lot at the edge of town, a place once used for storage by the forestry department. The land stretched wide, bordered by tall firs and an open meadow. The ground was uneven, but in Ethan's eyes, it was perfect. He leaned against his cane, watching Lila chase Ranger across the field. The German shepherd was stronger now. His winter coat gleamed in the morning light, and his movements carried that effortless grace only working dogs possessed. Lila, wearing a faded denim jacket 2 sizes too big, laughed as Ranger darted past her, kicking up clumps of dirt. It was laughter that no longer carried fear, only freedom. Behind Ethan, the crunch of gravel announced Harold Dunn's arrival. The old detective looked more at ease these days. Though his weathered face still held the lines of too many years in law enforcement, he wore a flannel shirt under a brown leather jacket, his gray beard trimmed neatly. "You sure about this?" he asked, stepping up beside Ethan. "Turning an abandoned storage yard into a youth center is one thing. Turning it into a home, that's another." Ethan smiled faintly. "You're the one who said I needed something worth staying alive for." Harold grunted. "I said that. Didn't say it should cost me free weekends of construction work." Ethan chuckled, the sound soft but genuine. "You complain more than the lumber. Lumber doesn't have arthritis." Their quiet banter was interrupted by a car pulling into the gravel lot. Claire Morrison stepped out, her blonde hair tied back under a wool cap, carrying blueprints rolled under one arm. She was dressed for practicality, work jeans, a faded green coat, boots with the soles worn smooth. There was a calm competence in her every motion, the kind that came from years of doing difficult things without waiting for gratitude. "I got the final inspection clearance," she said, setting the blueprints on the hood of the truck. "You can officially start building without the town breathing down your neck." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You mean without you breathing down my neck?" Claire smirked. "Same difference." Harold leaned over the plans. "What's this section here?" Claire pointed with her pencil. "Dormitory units, small but insulated. Each one will house up to 4 kids. And here's the medical wing. I got some of my old colleagues from the regional hospital to volunteer shifts." Ethan's gaze lingered on the papers. The drawings were simple, but filled with meaning. A place where children like Lila could sleep without fear, where someone would ask their names not because they were suspects, but because they mattered. He turned to Claire. "You really think people will come?" She shrugged lightly. "They always come, Ethan, just not always soon enough." Ranger barked then, sprinting toward them. In his mouth was something small and shiny. Lila followed, panting, cheeks flushed red. "He found it," she said breathlessly. Ranger dropped a tarnished metal tag at Ethan's feet. It was old, bent, but the engraving was still clear. K9-241, Valor Unit. Ethan knelt slowly, picking it up. "This was his old service tag," he murmured. "I thought it was lost after the explosion." Lila's eyes widened. "It's like he was bringing back a part of your past." Ethan looked at the dog, who wagged his tail as if confirming the thought. "Or maybe he's telling me it's time to stop hiding from it." That evening, as the sun sank over Maple Hollow, they gathered around a small fire outside the cabin. Marcus Boyd arrived later than expected, his car covered in dust from the long drive. He had traded his federal badge for freelance investigative work, preferring to chase truth on his own terms. His tall frame and unkempt hair made him look more like a journalist than an agent. But there was a calmness about him, a man who had stared into darkness and decided to build lanterns instead. "I've been looking into Doyle's network," Marcus said, handing Ethan a folder. "Most of it's dismantled, but a few pieces slipped through. Shell companies, offshore accounts, someone's still moving money." Ethan opened the file, scanning the documents. "You think they'll come after us again?" "Not right away," Marcus said. "But men like Doyle never work alone. You cut one head, two more grow back. You'll want to be ready." Harold leaned back in his chair. "You saying we're not done yet?" Marcus smiled thinly. "Justice is a garden, Harold. You can't just pull the weeds once and walk away." Claire poured coffee into mugs, her expression softening. "Then we keep tending it." As the fire crackled, Lila sat cross-legged beside Ranger, watching the adults talk. She had grown quieter since the quarry, not from fear, but reflection. She had seen the worst of humanity and yet refused to let it define her. She turned to Ethan. "Do you think this place will really change things?" He met her gaze. "It has to start somewhere. Why not here?" Later that night, when the others had gone to bed, Ethan stayed outside. The meadow shimmered under the moonlight. Ranger lay at his feet, eyes half closed. From the distance came the sound of the river thawing, a slow and patient rhythm, like breathing. Ethan thought about the past, the badge he had lost, the people he couldn't save, the life that had nearly ended in fire. And now, standing in this quiet valley with a loyal dog, a brave girl, and a team of good people, he realized something profound. The past wasn't gone. It had been repurposed. What once crippled him, now guided him. He took Valor's old tag from his pocket and hung it on the fence post beside him. It glimmered faintly in the moonlight, a symbol of something that refused to die. Behind him, Lila's voice broke the silence. "You can't sleep either?" Ethan turned. She was wrapped in a blanket, her hair falling loose around her face. She looked so young in that moment, and yet older than most adults he knew. He smiled. "You caught me." She came closer, sitting on the steps beside him. "I was thinking, maybe I could help when you start building. Paint walls, carry things, whatever you need." Ethan chuckled softly. "That's kind of you, but you should be in school, not construction." "I can do both," she said firmly. "You said this place was for kids like me. Maybe I should help build it so they know it's real." He looked at her, heart tightening. "You remind me of someone I used to be." "Someone who didn't give up?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "Exactly." They sat in silence for a long time, the night air filled with the gentle sound of crickets. Ranger lifted his head once, sniffed the air, then rested it back on his paws. The world felt lighter, less burdened by ghosts. When Ethan finally rose to go inside, he looked at the half-built foundation of the future shelter, the framework faintly visible in the moonlight. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "we start digging for real." Lila smiled. "Then it begins." And it did. By late summer, Maple Hollow had transformed into a living mural of warmth and renewal. The scent of sawdust and wildflowers hung in the air as the sound of hammers echoed through the valley. Where there had once been an empty field of abandoned lumber and weeds, now rose the sturdy frame of Valor House, a haven built not of stone or steel, but of second chances. Ethan Cole stood in the sunlight, wiping sweat from his brow. He no longer relied on the cane for balance. His steps were steady, slow but sure, each one an act of defiance against the past that had tried to chain him. Beside him, Ranger trotted proudly, his tan and black coat shining like burnished gold. The dog carried a rope toy in his mouth and occasionally dropped it near the workers' boots, as if to remind them that joy belonged even here among the scars. The construction crew had grown over the months. Many were locals, carpenters, retired firefighters, off-duty deputies. But a few were younger faces, kids who had known hard roads. One of them was Benji Morales, a 16-year-old with wiry arms, sharp hazel eyes, and a quiet disposition. His father had been imprisoned for theft, and his mother had vanished soon after. Benji rarely spoke, but when he did, his voice carried a calm intelligence. He worked faster than anyone else, and Ethan had noticed the way Ranger followed him, as if recognizing something kindred, a survivor's scent. "Benji," Ethan called out, motioning toward a half-built porch railing. "Make sure those nails are flush. We don't need splinters on opening day." Benji nodded without looking up. "Got it, sir." Ethan smiled faintly. "And drop the sir. It makes me feel older than Harold." From across the yard, Harold Dunn barked a laugh. He was in charge of supply logistics now, though he often used the position as an excuse to sit in the shade and drink iced tea. "You are older than me," he called out. just in spirit. Claire Morrison stepped out from the main building carrying a clipboard, her hair tied in a loose bun. Months of work had given her skin a golden tone, and her calm authority had turned her into the heart of the project. She directed volunteers with quiet precision, her voice carrying both firmness and gentleness. "Ethan," she said, glancing over the site, "we need to finalize the list of opening guests. The mayor wants to attend. So does the local paper." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "We're really going to have a ribbon-cutting ceremony?" Claire smiled. "You built something good, Cole. Let people see it." He hesitated, still uncomfortable under the weight of recognition. "I didn't do it alone." "No one ever does," she said softly, then returned to her clipboard. Ranger barked suddenly, sprinting toward the gate. Ethan turned to see a familiar figure walking up the dirt path. It was Marcus Boyd, wearing a faded brown trench coat over a collared shirt, his usual guarded smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You really did it," Marcus said, looking around. "I wasn't sure you'd stay put long enough." "Neither was I," Ethan replied, "but someone had to keep you from chasing ghosts." Marcus handed him an envelope. "Consider this good news for once. Doyle's final appeal was denied. He's gone for good." Ethan took the letter, but his expression didn't change. "That chapter's done," he said quietly. "What about the others?" Marcus shrugged. "Some ran, some folded. The money trail dried up. You broke the spine of something ugly, Cole. Rest of it's just cleanup." Harold joined them, squinting under his hat. "You sticking around for the ceremony?" Marcus gave a half smile. "Wouldn't miss it. Haven't been to a celebration in years that didn't end in a shootout." The men laughed, the sound light but sincere. Later that evening, the group gathered in the nearly finished common hall. It was a large wooden room, lined with windows that looked out onto the forest. The setting sun painted the walls amber. Lila sat near the fireplace with Luke in her lap, reading aloud from a children's book she had found in the donation pile. Her voice carried softly through the room. Ranger lay at her feet, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed. Ethan watched from the doorway. Lila had grown in quiet strength over the past months. Her once nervous manner had turned into composure, her eyes bright with confidence. She was no longer the frightened girl who had burst into a diner asking for a miracle. She was part of a family now, not by blood, but by faith and survival. Claire joined Ethan by the doorway, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "She's reading to him every night," she said. "She says it helps him sleep." "She's helping more than she knows," Ethan murmured. Outside, the evening deepened into violet. Lanterns flickered across the worksite, their glow mingling with the chirp of crickets. Benji packed up his tools while Marcus leaned against the truck, smoking a cigarette and watching the stars come alive. Harold hummed an old tune from his police days. One ranger seemed to recognize. The dog's ears twitched in rhythm. When the first day of autumn came, Valor House opened its doors. The ceremony drew the entire town. Shopkeepers, students, elderly couples, even a local pastor who had once officiated Ethan's wedding years ago. The mayor gave a brief speech about courage and community, his words earnest but forgettable. Then it was Ethan's turn. He stood before the crowd, the wind brushing through his hair. "This isn't about what we built," he said slowly, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had learned to live with pain. "It's about who we build it for, the ones who fall through the cracks, the ones who think they've been forgotten. We were all broken once, but broken things can still hold light." A hush fell over the gathering. Lila stood near the front row, holding Luke's tiny hand. When Ethan looked her way, she gave him a smile so radiant it made his throat tighten. He nodded toward her. "This place exists because one girl refused to stop believing in miracles. She reminded me that faith isn't about walking unscathed. It's about standing back up, no matter how many times you're knocked down." When the ribbon was cut, applause filled the air. Ranger barked once, tail wagging proudly. Benji grinned for the first time anyone had seen, and Harold clapped Marcus on the back so hard the man nearly dropped his cigarette. As the sun set, music and laughter drifted from the building. Children ran through the yard, while volunteers served food. Ethan stood at the edge of it all, watching the golden light spill through the windows. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like an observer to life. He felt part of it. Claire approached quietly, her expression soft. "You did it, Ethan." He smiled. "No, we did." She looked around. "So what now?" He glanced down at Ranger, who sat beside him, watching the horizon. "Now," he said, "we keep the lights on, for whoever needs to find their way home." As the night deepened, the first stars appeared above Maple Hollow. The valley was quiet again, but not the silence of grief. It was peace. Lila's laughter mingled with the sound of the wind, and for Ethan Cole, it was the closest thing to grace he had ever known. Ranger lifted his head, gazing at the sky, ears twitching. Ethan followed his eyes upward, then smiled. "Come on, boy," he whispered. "Let's go home." And together, man, child, and loyal dog, they stepped into the light spilling from Valor House, the house that had been built from ruin and named after the courage that had saved them all. Sometimes God does not send us miracles wrapped in lightning or thunder. He sends them quietly, through the people who step into our lives when we least expect them. Ethan's healing was not only of the body, but of the heart, proof that grace often wears the face of kindness, courage, and loyalty. The house he built, the lives he touched, and the laughter that returned to Maple Hollow were not coincidences. They were the gentle works of God's hand, guiding broken souls back toward the light. In our own lives, we may carry pain, guilt, or fear, but remember, the Lord can turn even our scars into blessings if we let Him work through us. So, wherever you are watching from, may God bless your home, your family, and your heart today. If this story touched you, please share it with someone who needs hope, subscribe to our channel to hear more stories of faith and redemption, and comment Amen below as a prayer for everyone who still believes that miracles are real. May the Lord watch over you and fill your days with His peace and mercy. Amen.